Holy God, may your word be spoken, may your word be heard. Amen.
Amen.
Please be seated. We've set off on a little adventure of faith, a journey of faith. Maybe it's not so little. And we're asking questions in each of these months between now and the end of the calendar year. And we're asking, who is God here in October? We're asking, who is the church? Who are we as the church in November? And we're going to ask, who is Jesus in December, that season of Advent, to prepare us for the mystery and the joy of Christmas. So we come back to our theme of who is God this morning. And we have this story, this wonderful story, this amazing story. There are so many amazing stories in the book of Exodus. But this story between Moses and God and the mountaintop. And Moses' deep desire to see God. And Moses asks for this privilege, this gift of seeing God because he's stirred up. He's stirred up. He's not sure how he can go forward. He's not sure how he can be the leader that God is asking him to be for the Israelites, to take them through this wilderness and to the promised land. We remember, I hope we remember, what happened last week. What happened last week between God and Moses and the people? God changed his mind. What was going on that God had to change God's mind? The golden calf. The golden calf. The people started to worship this golden calf as the God who led them out of Egypt, having lost sight of Moses, who had gone up on the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments from God, and who was gone for a time indefinite. And so in their uncertainty, in their fear, in their lack of focus, in their ungroundedness, the people clung to something that they could see and touch and know, in place of the invisible, transcendent God who was up there with Moses somewhere, and who knows what's going on or when they might ever see God. There's another tension in this story if you were to read all of Exodus, and you should. You should read the whole book of Exodus. That is something that you, as a person of faith, should do. I don't drop many shoulds on you. Here's one. You should read the book of Exodus in its wholeness. There are other parts of the story where God starts to manifest on mountains when they arrive at this place. And God arrives with so much power and fierceness that the people are afraid. And they don't want God to draw near. God, don't come near us lest we die. That happened earlier in the story, before the golden calf experience. So there's all these tensions and cross tensions between God, the people, and Moses. And Moses, having gone through the golden calf incident, is now in a place with God where he needs more if he's going to carry on. He needs more for his own strength and groundedness and focus if he's going to make it as their leader to the promised land. That is not an unreasonable thing for Moses to ask. And God, here's the thing with God. You know, there are stories in the Bible of people asking God things and they get kind of smacked down. Right? Job comes to mind, Zechariah, if you're deep in the New Testament, you remember the birth narratives in Luke. Some people kind of get knocked around. But if you come to God with an open heart and in right relationship, God will answer you compassionately. It happens to Mary. When Mary's talking to Gabriel, and Gabriel's saying, you're going to bear a child. And she's like, really? And how? He answers. Well, here's another place. Moses is in this open-hearted place of needing from God something more. And God offers it. God doesn't put him down. God offers it. But interestingly, he can't get quite everything that he wants. Right? Moses wants to see God in all God's glory. And God says, you can't have that. You can't have that. Because if that came to you, you would be destroyed by it. You would die. That's fierce. That's a fierce truth about who Moses is and who God is. God's so much more powerful than we are that we should keep healthy boundaries between us and God. Right? We can't draw too close. And yet, there are paths of right relationship that we can have with this God who is the source of life and energy and power and also love and compassion and mercy. Moses is in a place where he's worn out and he needs something more. God's people get to that place a lot. I'm thinking of Jesus in this story that he's having another test, another trickery dialogue between himself and leaders of the Pharisees and Sadducees, and in this case also Herod, the corrupt king. They're trying to trip Jesus up publicly to get his standing among the people, which was so high, to get it knocked down so that they might keep the compromised peace that they have with the Roman authorities. Jesus just must have felt like every day was a battle in that last week of his life. And how could he not be exhausted, worn out, tired? It's a little bit of that. You hypocrites, right? He's just kind of throwing it down, throwing it back. I've had enough of you guys. Jesus took times for rest and renewal. He took it with his friends. He took it with his friends at that Last Supper. That was, I think, as much for Jesus as it was for them. For him to be just taking into his heart all the love he has for these, his friends, and this good meal that they're sharing, and this sacred story of the Passover that they're honoring. Jesus is feeding his own soul to deal with those times of challenge and struggle. We are in the midst of times of challenge and struggle. And we need to have our souls fed by God. And God desires that for us. God desires that for us. So God, for us today, is the one who desires to be experienced, but in a way that upbuilds us and doesn't drag us down. God desires for us to have experience of God, but in a way that builds us up. I suspect all of us have had a taste of God's presence and of how it upbuilds us and enlivens us. I suspect every single person who hears this sermon can think of a time when they drew close to God. Not too close, but they drew close to God and felt the sustaining love and warmth of God's presence. Hold that. Dwell in that. You don't always get what you want from God. I don't want to quote the Rolling Stones, but I'm falling into it. It's such a catchy line. But God will give you what you need. God will give you the sustenance that you need if you turn with open heart and right intention. So here's a story of one of my experiences of God's presence. It was 2009. You remember 2009, right? That century passed. It wasn't really, but this year feels like, right, a century of years. That's what I mean. So it was 2009, and it was the summer, and I had come through lots of things in my life. And I had kind of landed on my feet. I had gone through a divorce some years earlier from my first marriage, coming apart in a heartbreaking way when I had started my ministry, my first ministry at Christ Church Plymouth. And I had settled in there now, and I was in a good place, and I felt confident and comfortable in my ministry. I had completed my PhD, this 12-year odyssey, and I mean to evoke the odyssey, right, because that's what it felt like, to get that thing done. And I'd gotten it done. I had successfully gotten it done. And I was taking a vacation. It kind of felt like my first vacation ever in some ways in my adult life. And at that point, I was alone. And I decided, having gotten a love of camping, that was one of the things my first wife and I shared, and I took that into my own heart, I decided I would go to Acadia National Park. Right? In our relationship, she was from Colorado, so she knew the mountains, and we'd gone to Glacier, we'd gone to Yellowstone, all these great places. I didn't think I could go out there on my own, but I could get to Acadia. I could get to Acadia National Park. And I had a lovely time there. My friends, actually, you know Jake and Thea. You know Thea. Thea's been here many a time. They're dear friends of mine going way, way back. They had gone to Acadia. They found this private campground outside that was a little nicer than the campgrounds that were in the park itself. So I was staying there, and I just had a wonderful time camping and eating and walking around. And I remember this is not this is more the fear experience. There's this thing in Acadia National Park called the Beehive. Have you ever been to Acadia? Has anyone ever been to Acadia? Yeah. Do you know the Beehive? Yeah. So the Beehive are these rock faces where what they did, and the national parks were established decades ago, so old, sturdy iron bars were drilled into the rock face so that you could ladder down. I didn't know that. So I'm going up this trail, and I'm like, where's the trail? The rock has stopped. And, there's a ladder to take me down. I don't know distances, right? I grew up in New York. What do I know? You take an elevator to the 6th floor. That's what I know. So I don't know how high I was, but it wasn't too high for me because I did it. But goodness gracious, I was scared to death. So that's a bonus story, right? Sometimes you got to face things that you're a little afraid of and go through them to get to the more robust things that lie ahead of you. So there was a day in my time there. I was there almost a full week, I think. I think I was there 6 days. And I was taking a hike along one of the trails, one of the rocky, long trails that was flat, and not a vertical ascent. And I came to this spot. There on the mountain where there was a large boulder sitting there. Kind of, if I'm remembering my geology right, it was one of those glacial boulders left behind by the receding glaciers, kind of rounded. And it was sitting there. And there were wispy white clouds in the sky, with the blue framing the white. And God was there. God was there in the rock. God was there in the clouds. God was there in the sky. God was there in me. And I just stood lapping it up. And it so happens I had a camera with me. And I took a picture of that moment. And it was buried somewhere in my various sundry files of Google Drive and Dropbox and who knows what. But I found it. This is what you get on an inkjet, plain paper, right? But you can get the outline of it. You can get the outline of it. We're going to let Georgia bring it to the camera. That picture, just the way the clouds kind of swirl and the darkness and light are contrasted, it just evokes some of the experience of God's presence that I had in that moment. And if it was a proper picture, maybe you'd feel it too. Maybe you feel it now looking at it. I don't know. Right? This is one of those things where when I've offered you the frame, maybe you can't help but see it. But isn't that a thing of faith? We offer one another the frames of our experience, and suddenly we can see God in places that we might not have before. Now, a mountaintop and nature, right, that's privileged God territory. That's privileged God territory. So, if you have had a mountaintop experience, then you know that nature is the place that the vast majority of people have their experiences of the divine. And maybe that's what's in your heart when you think about where you have experienced God, where God has fed and infused your soul with love and energy and life. That's one of my moments. It's not the only one, but that's one of my moments, that mountaintop in Acadia National Park. What's yours? What's one of yours that you can rest in here this morning or whenever you're hearing this sermon? What's one of your experiences of God's presence where God is desiring you to know how much you are loved? Where God is desiring for you to know and take to heart that wherever you're going, God will be with you. Let that place sit in your imagination, in your soul. Take a moment to drink it back in again. And trust that in times to come, God will renew that well of experience for you. And you will know that you are most special in God's eyes. We'll take a moment of silence and continue with the creed.